3 days before my wife disappeared, she placed a small wooden box on our kitchen table. It wasn't expensive, just an old oak box with a brass lock and a tiny scratch across the lid. "Promise me something," Sarah said. I smiled without looking up from my coffee. "That depends." She slid a small silver key toward me. "If I don't come home, don't open this for 30 days. I laughed, waiting for her to laugh too. She didn't. "Sarah, you're flying to Chicago for a business conference, not going to war." She quietly shook her head. "Please, Ethan, promise me." Something in her voice made the room feel strangely quiet. I picked up the key and slipped it into my pocket. "Fine, 30 days. Only then did she smile. "Thank you." It was the last normal conversation we ever had. Sarah worked for a nonprofit organization that helped families rebuild their lives after disasters. She often traveled to meet volunteers, donors, and local organizations. She loved her job but rarely talked about it. "Most of the people we help deserve their privacy," she always said. I admired that about her. We had been married for 8 years and I never had a reason to doubt her. The next afternoon, I drove her to the airport. Before getting out of the car, she kissed me longer than usual. "Don't forget your promise." "I'll see you in 2 days," I replied. She smiled, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "I hope so." I watched her disappear into the terminal without realizing those would be the last words I would hear from her. The following evening, my phone rang while I was making dinner. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. "Mr. Brooks?" a woman asked. "Yes." "This is Officer Linda Perez with the Illinois State Police. Are you the husband of Sarah Brooks?" My stomach tightened instantly. "Yes." "Is she all right?" Silence. Then the words that changed my life forever. "We found your wife's rental car abandoned along Highway 64. I could barely breathe. Where is she?" "We don't know." I flew to Chicago the next morning. Detectives questioned me for hours. Did Sarah have enemies? No. Financial problems? No. Someone she feared, not that I knew of. They searched the rental car from front to back. Her suitcase was still inside. So were her purse, passport, laptop, and phone. Nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of a struggle. No fingerprints except Sarah's. No security cameras captured anyone leaving the area. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. For the next 4 weeks, I barely slept. Search teams combed nearby forests, rivers, abandoned buildings, and empty fields. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Television stations shared Sarah's photograph every evening. Tips came from different states, but every lead ended the same way, with disappointment. Back home, the wooden box sat untouched on the shelf in our bedroom. Every morning I looked at it. Every night I fought the urge to unlock it. More than once I stood there with the key in my hand. But a promise is a strange thing. You keep it even when the person you made it to may never know. On the 30th day, just after midnight, I carried the box downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. My hands trembled as I turned the tiny silver key. The lock clicked open. Inside, there was no goodbye letter, no photographs, no money, only another key attached to a faded tag. Locker 308, Union Central Station. Beneath it lay a folded note with 7 handwritten words. "Everything begins where we first met." Ethan froze. There was only one problem. He and Sarah had never met at Union Central Station. I read the note over and over, convinced I had misunderstood it. Sarah and I had met at a charity fundraiser in Portland 8 years earlier. We had laughed over burnt coffee and spent the entire evening talking about books, travel, and the places we still wanted to see. Union Central Station had never been part of our story. At least, not the story I knew. Early the next morning, I booked the first flight to Chicago. The station looked exactly as it did in old photographs, crowded with travelers rushing in every direction. Locker 308 was hidden near the back wall beside a row of forgotten storage units. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. The metal door opened with a dull click. Inside sat a weathered leather backpack, a sealed envelope, and a small digital voice recorder. The envelope had my name written across the front in Sarah's handwriting. I opened it first. "Ethan, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. Before you believe anything you hear about me, listen to the recorder from beginning to end. Then follow the map inside the backpack. Please don't stop halfway. The truth only makes sense when every piece is together. I love you. Always, Sarah." I immediately pressed play on the recorder. Her voice filled the quiet hallway. "If you're hearing this, I couldn't explain everything myself. I'm sorry. I know this must be frightening, but I need you to trust me one last time." Then the recording stopped. I pressed the button again. Nothing. The battery icon flashed red before the screen went black. It had died after only 12 seconds. Frustrated, I searched the backpack for a charger but found only a folded city map covered with handwritten circles and dates. One address had been marked 3 different times: 419 Ash Street. I took a taxi across town. The building was an old brick apartment complex with boarded windows and faded paint. It looked abandoned. An elderly woman sweeping the sidewalk noticed me staring. "Looking for someone?" she asked. I showed her Sarah's picture. The woman frowned. "I've seen her before." My heart skipped. "When?" "She came here every month, always carrying folders, always asking about apartment 12. "Who lived there?" The woman hesitated. "A man named Daniel Cross." "Do you know him?" She slowly shook her head. "Never really spoke to him. Quiet fellow, left about 2 weeks ago." "Do you know where?" "No, but your wife wasn't the only one asking." "What do you mean?" "Another man came looking for him 3 days before your wife disappeared." "Did you see him?" She nodded. "Black SUV, expensive suit, didn't look like police." Before I could ask another question, she reached into her pocket. "Your wife asked me to give this to you, but only if you ever came here alone." She handed me a folded business card. On the back, Sarah had written only 4 words: "Don't trust Daniel, ever." My mind raced. Who was Daniel Cross? Why had Sarah been visiting him every month? And why leave me a note warning me not to trust him? As I turned the card over, something else caught my eye. Tucked inside the fold was a small photograph. It showed Sarah standing beside a man I had never seen before. He had his arm around her shoulders, and both of them were smiling at the camera. The picture had been taken only weeks earlier. On the back, written in blue ink, 5 words that made my blood run cold: "He knows where I am." I couldn't stop staring at the photograph. Sarah looked genuinely happy. The man beside her was around 60 with gray hair, a short beard, and kind eyes. Nothing about him looked threatening. Yet the words on the back of the picture refused to leave my mind. "He knows where I am." I drove back to my hotel and searched every public record I could find. Daniel Cross had almost no online presence, no social media, no recent address, no business listings. It was as if he had disappeared years ago. The only result I found was an old newspaper article from 12 years earlier. It mentioned a volunteer named Daniel Cross who had helped coordinate emergency housing after a tornado destroyed part of a small Illinois town. Sarah had started working for the same nonprofit only a year later. Coincidence? I wasn't sure anymore. The next morning, I returned to Union Central Station and found a small electronics shop. After replacing the battery in the recorder, I pressed play again. Sarah's voice returned. "If you're hearing the rest of this recording, you've already found the backpack. I need you to understand one thing. Daniel Cross is not my enemy. If someone tells you he is, they're lying. I asked you not to trust him because I knew someone else might find the note before you did. I needed to protect him." I paused the recording, completely confused. Sarah had intentionally written a false warning. Why? I continued listening. Daniel has spent years helping people disappear from dangerous situations, not criminals, victims, women escaping abusive partners, children whose lives depended on staying hidden. Everything he does is legal, but secrecy keeps them alive. My heartbeat slowed, but only for a moment. 3 weeks ago, Sarah continued, I discovered someone inside our organization has been selling confidential information about the families we protect. Names, addresses, new identities. I couldn't go to the police until I knew who was responsible. Daniel agreed to help me gather proof. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, every late meeting, every unexplained trip, every secret phone call made a little more sense. Then Sarah's voice became quieter. If I disappear, it means I got too close. Before she could say another word, loud voices interrupted the recording. A man shouted something too far from the microphone to understand. Sarah whispered, "They're here." The recording ended. I played the final seconds again and again. In the background, I noticed a faint sound I hadn't heard before. A church bell, 3 slow chimes, then silence. I took the recorder to an audio specialist, hoping he could clean the background noise. After an hour, he called me into the studio. "There's more than a bell," he said. He increased the volume. Beneath the static, another voice became clear. A man's voice, calm, familiar. "Sarah, we have to leave now." "Who is that?" I asked. The technician shrugged. "You know him?" I did. I had heard that voice dozens of times before. It belonged to Michael Turner, the executive director of Sarah's nonprofit. The same man who had stood beside me at her volunteer appreciation dinner 6 months earlier. The same man who had hugged me after she disappeared and promised they were doing everything possible to help find her. Suddenly, one question echoed through my mind. If Michael was with Sarah moments before she vanished, why had he never told the police? I called Detective Linda Perez the moment I left the audio studio. She listened carefully as I explained everything, but when I mentioned Michael Turner's name, she became unusually quiet. "Mr. Brooks," she finally said, "there's something I didn't tell you because we couldn't verify it at the time." My heart pounded. "What is it?" "Your wife's phone records showed she spoke to Michael Turner more than 40 times during the month before she disappeared." 40. He told us they were discussing a fundraising campaign. We had no evidence to question him. I drove straight to the nonprofit's headquarters. Michael welcomed me into his office with the same sympathetic expression he had worn since Sarah vanished. "Ethan," he said, standing to shake my hand, "I'm so sorry you're still going through this." I didn't sit down. I placed the recorder on his desk and pressed play. His own voice filled the room. The color drained from his face. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he closed the office door. "You finally found it," he whispered. "Found what?" "The truth Sarah wanted you to hear." "Then start talking." Michael took a deep breath. "Sarah discovered that confidential files were being leaked. Families who had escaped violent partners were suddenly being found. At first we thought it was a computer hack, but she refused to believe it. She said someone on the inside was selling information." "Who?" I asked. Michael slowly shook his head. "We didn't know, that's why she started investigating." "Why didn't you tell the police any of this?" "Because Sarah begged me not to." I stared at him in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" He opened a desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope. Across the front, in Sarah's handwriting, were the words, "Only if Ethan finds the recorder." My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "Ethan, if Michael is reading this with you, it means he kept his promise." I couldn't tell anyone what we were doing because we didn't know who to trust. Every person we questioned could have been the one leaking information. If something happened to me, I needed at least one person to stay silent until you found the evidence. I looked back at Michael. What evidence? Without saying a word, he opened a hidden compartment beneath his bookshelf. Inside sat a black storage case filled with hard drives, printed emails, financial records, and photographs. Sarah had copied everything before she disappeared. Together, they began searching through the files. Most of the documents were ordinary reports, but one spreadsheet immediately stood out. Hundreds of names appeared beside bank transfers from an unknown account. Each payment had been made only days before a protected family's new address was leaked. Someone had been paid for every life they endangered. Michael pointed to one final column. Look at the initials. Every payment had been approved by the same person. LH, I frowned. Who is LH? Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder containing employee records. Only one senior staff member matched those initials, Laura Hastings. She had worked beside Sarah for almost 10 years and had personally comforted me the day after my wife disappeared. I remembered her telling me, Sarah always believed the good in people would win. Now I wondered if she had been hiding the darkest secret of all. Just as I reached for the next file, Michael's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and froze. I noticed the caller ID before he turned it over. It displayed only 2 words, unknown number. He answered cautiously. No one spoke for several seconds. Then a woman's voice quietly said, "Tell Ethan, they found the storage unit." The line went dead. Michael looked at me with fear in his eyes. That was Sarah. My heart stopped. She's alive. Michael slowly nodded. And if she called now? She's running out of time. Trace the call, I shouted. Michael was already dialing Detective Perez, but within seconds he lowered the phone. It won't help, he said. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. It's gone. I couldn't accept that. She said they found the storage unit. What storage unit? Michael rushed to another filing cabinet and pulled out a map of Chicago. Several locations were marked in red. One address had a circle around it. Sarah rented a storage unit under a legal alias. She kept copies of everything there in case someone discovered the files in my office. Who else knew? I asked. Michael's silence answered the question before he spoke. Only Sarah and me. Detective Perez arrived 20 minutes later with 2 investigators. We drove together to the storage facility on the south side of the city. The manager recognized Sarah's photograph immediately. She was here about a month ago, he said, but 2 men came yesterday asking about her unit. They claimed to be federal agents. Were they? Perez asked. The manager shook his head. No badges, no paperwork. Something felt wrong, so I refused. He handed us a copy of the security footage. 2 men in dark jackets walked through the hallway before leaving empty-handed. One of them looked directly into the camera. Detective Perez paused the video. I've seen him before. Back at headquarters, facial recognition confirmed his identity. Eric Nolan, a private investigator who had lost his license years earlier after accepting illegal surveillance jobs. His financial records revealed something even worse. During the past 18 months, he had received multiple payments from an account controlled by Laura Hastings. Perez looked at me. Your wife was right. Someone inside the organization hired people to track the families she promised to protect. We opened Sarah's storage unit that same evening. At first, it looked almost empty. A folding chair, 2 cardboard boxes, an old desk lamp. Then Michael noticed fresh scratches beneath the concrete floor mat. Together, we lifted it and found a hidden metal compartment. Inside were dozens of flash drives, signed contracts, bank statements, and a notebook filled with Sarah's handwriting. Every page connected another piece of the scheme. Confidential addresses had been sold to abusive spouses, criminal debt collectors, and even human trafficking networks. Sarah had documented everything. Detective Perez closed the notebook and quietly said, "This is enough to bring down an entire network." Then she noticed one final envelope taped beneath the lid. It was addressed to me. "Ethan, if you're reading this, you're closer than I ever hoped you'd be. If I couldn't come home, I needed someone to finish what I started. Don't waste time looking for me. Save the families first. If the evidence reaches the police, my job is done. No matter what happens to me." I felt my hands shaking. She wrote this expecting to die. Michael looked away. She knew the risks. Just then, one of the investigators called from outside. "Detective, you need to see this." We hurried into the parking lot. A silver sedan had just entered the facility before suddenly reveering at high speed. As it sped toward the exit, something flew from the passenger window and landed only a few feet away from us. Detective Perez ran forward while officers chased the car. The vehicle disappeared into traffic. On the ground lay a small white envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Sarah sitting in a dimly lit room. She looked tired, but she was alive. Across the bottom, written in black marker, were 6 chilling words. "You still have 24 hours left." Detective Perez immediately issued an alert across the state. The photograph was examined by forensic specialists, who identified a distinctive mural reflected in a dusty window behind Sarah. Within hours, they traced it to an abandoned warehouse scheduled for demolition outside Chicago. A tactical team surrounded the building before sunrise. Inside, they found Sarah locked in a small office. Weak and exhausted, but alive, Laura Hastings had realized Sarah had copied every document exposing the network. She ordered Eric Nolan to keep Sarah hidden until they recovered the evidence. When they learned the files had already reached the police, they fled. Both were arrested less than 48 hours later while trying to leave the country. The investigation uncovered years of corruption and led to multiple convictions. Dozens of families were warned before their identities could be exposed, and several missing person cases were finally solved. Months later, Sarah returned to the nonprofit, not as an investigator, but as an advisor helping rebuild the program she had risked everything to protect. One evening, we placed the old wooden box on the same kitchen table where it had all begun. I smiled and asked, "Was the box always part of the plan?" Sarah laughed softly. "No. It became the plan the moment I realized I might not make it home." I looked at the tiny brass lock that had once filled me with fear. "I hated that box." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It brought you to the truth." I nodded. She was right. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about trusting someone when nothing makes sense. The box was never meant to hide a secret. It was meant to protect the truth until the right moment. And in the end, that truth saved far more lives than our own.